Uh, Hi. So I just had a question that one of my atheist friends has asked me before. He asked me, in the Old Testament, God commanded the Israelites to kill other armies and commit supposedly horrible acts. I think one of them he brought up specifically was God told the Israelites, it was either the Canaanites or the Midianites, to first of all kill the men in the army, but then also enslave the women and children, I believe.
Yeah, you need to ask him the context of that, because I guarantee you what he's saying there is out of context. But
Yeah.
which one do you want to talk about?
Just in general, like how is God commanding the Israelites to do stuff like that morally right?
Okay. Well, first of all, let's just go through it in order here. First of all, when atheists bring this kind of stuff up, I always ask them that if there is no God, why is any Old Testament atrocity wrong? Right? Because as we said before, if there's no God, nothing's ultimately right or wrong. There's no standard. It's just one person's opinion against another. But if the atheist then says, okay, let's assume for the sake of argument God does exist, why would he do this? Fair question. Next point, is God arbitrary, or does he give reasons for judging people in the Old Testament?
He gives reasons.
Of course he gives reasons, right? It's judgment. These people are being judged for their sin. And in fact, what they were doing is they were sacrificing their children to the pagan god Molech. They'd heat this fire up under this metal god and then put their babies on the arms of this molten hot idol, and the babies would scream as they sizzled to death. Plutarch, a Greek writer in the first century, talks about this too. He says the drummers in the town would beat their drums more loudly so the parents couldn't hear the screams of their own children. You know, at every college campus I go to, somebody stands up and says, if there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? Here's an instance in the Old Testament where God wants to stop the evil and the atheists are complaining about it. So why complain that God doesn't stop evil, but then complain when he does? Also, is God committing murder by ending lives on earth? Is he? No, God by definition can't commit murder. If God is the creator of life, he owns life, and he's the only one that can resurrect it. So it's up to God when we die. We can't do what God does. In fact, we have a phrase in our society. It's called, don't play God. What does that assume? It assumes that God can do things that we can't. If God wants to kill somebody, he can. He can do that for whatever reason he wants. Also, God has the right to usher people into the next life, whether they are 2 years old or 82 years old. If Christianity is true, people don't die, they just change location. They go from this life to the next life. And finally, the Old Testament theocracy was unique and temporary. It was not the ideal for all time, but the means to a promised new covenant. In other words, God was getting the promised people in the promised land to bring forth the promised Messiah, and he warned the people in the land who were going to pollute the purity of Israel to get out of the land, and when they didn't, God either drove them out or he ordered the Israelites to kill them. But as Paul Copan points out, Paul Copan is a scholar who wrote this book, Is God a Moral Monster? That God was concerned with sin, not ethnicity. In fact, as we read in the Old Testament prophets, they with God were more angered about Israel's disobedience, and they threatened divine judgment on Israel or Judah more than any of the other pagan nations. In fact, what happened to the people that worshiped the golden calf at the base of Mount Sinai? 3,000 of them were killed that day. They were Israelites. This is called judgment. Also, Copan points out that much of the language in the Old Testament, like wipe everybody out, exterminate them, kill them all, the women, the children, everybody. He points out that when you read that, like an example is Deuteronomy 7, it says wipe everybody out, kill them all. The very next verse says, and then don't intermarry with them. What? How could you intermarry with people that had just been wiped out? Copan is pointing out that this is exaggerated hyperbolic language that is common in the ancient Near East. That you would say, just like we would in a sports situation, we annihilated them. Really? They no longer exist? This is the kind of language that the Old Testament used. It didn't mean that every single person was killed. And Copan goes into a lot of detail in his book on that, so if you want to go further, get that.
All right,
All right?
thank you.
All right, thank you.